Welcome to Christian Chapel. If this is your first time here, first time to join us online, maybe first time in a while, we're thrilled that you're here. My name is Chris. I'm the pastor at Christian Chapel, and we are in the middle of a message series, actually towards the tail end of a message series where we're working through 1 Peter. 1 Peter is a letter written by Peter, one of the original 12 disciples who becomes one of the apostles, the leaders of the early church. He writes it to a group of churches in modern-day Turkey in the early 60s to mid-60s AD. They're on the verge of experiencing some intense persecution under the Roman Emperor Nero, and so Peter reminds them, you can be faithful because you are chosen. You have been chosen to follow Jesus at this time, in this place, among these people, and under these circumstances. So all summer long, we've been looking at this letter and trying to see what does his message of encouragement to them then mean to us now. Now, this morning we come to 1 Peter chapter 4 and a portion that, honestly, I'd rather not have to deal with because it means that there's going to be some personal discomfort in my life. It means that there's going to be some personal discomfort in yours. But the passage we're looking at today is where Peter's talking to us about what it looks like to endure suffering as followers of Jesus, and even more than suffering, to endure specific persecution simply because we follow Jesus. So the lead up to this point, Peter's been laying out all of these reasons of who we are and how we live differently. You know, he tells us we've been given new birth into a living hope, an inheritance that will never perish, spoil, or fade. He tells us we've been called out of darkness into God's wonderful light. We were formerly those who had not received mercy. Now we have received mercy. He's just painting this great picture for us of you've been called out. And our expectation would be, well, if I have this wonderful experience, everyone should be happy and celebrate with me. And yet Peter's also reminded us in his letter that now that you've been called out, you're to live holy, you're to be different, you're to put aside your old sinful human will and to live exclusively for the will of God. And when you do that, in a world that is tainted, corrupted, and controlled by sin, it causes you to live like an alien and an exile. You stand out and you stick out. And when you do, not everyone's going to like that, and not everyone's going to celebrate that. And so today, Peter really kind of gets into not just the idea that you may be persecuted or you might be, but that you actually will be. And to his original audience, this is where we think he's addressing their current situation of they are right now enduring suffering, enduring persecution. It's kind of like when we read through this passage. I don't know, when you go on a flight, you know the first time you fly and the flight attendant gets up and they're telling you like, hey, we're so excited that you chose our airline. We can't wait to deliver you safely to your destination. And then they go through the talk of, but just in case we can't, here's everything you need to know. Exits are here, 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 and here. Fasten the seatbelt, tighten it down. You know, in the event that we lose cabin pressure, you're going to put the mask over your face first, then the child you like most second, and then the other one third, and so on down the line and all these kind of things. Now, the first time you fly, you are probably locked into that information, and it might even make you a little nervous. But if you're like me, the more you fly, and especially the more safe flights you're on, the less you tend to pay attention to those instructions, right? To where they're then like, hey, please put away your tablets, your phones, stop reading, pay attention. You're just like, I got it. Here, 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 and here. Tighten, breathe. We're good. I don't need to hear it. It's a cushion, but I live in Oklahoma, so the chances of us crashing in water, I really don't even need that information. And you just kind of glaze on through it. Now, we can take the same approach pretty easily when we come to 1 Peter chapter 4 and 12 through 9, where we're looking this morning of thinking, hey, I'm sure this is good for people who live in a land where persecution is imminent or present. But for us, come on, it's Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's 2020. We're in the United States. Like, we don't, and I would agree with you, we do not experience persecution as Peter's audience did, as many of our brothers and sisters around the world do today. But I also want to encourage you, don't check out and think, well, that'll be good for someone somewhere, but not for me. Because the principles Peter teaches us here, they are sound for when we're being persecuted exclusively for our faith, but they are also applicable to any form of suffering, difficulty, hardship that we endure in any seasons of life. So we're going to look at 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 through 19. He writes, Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and God rests on you. If you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or thief or any other kind of criminal, or even as a meddler. However, if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. For it is time for judgment to begin with God's household. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? So then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. So we'll look at kind of three different aspects, the way that Peter lays this out for us. The first, we'll talk about the reality of suffering. He says in verse 12, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." A couple things we want to notice. First of all, Peter acknowledges, and I think we all can too, any form of persecution, suffering, hardship, difficulty is terrible. As followers of Christ, we don't have to pretend like pain doesn't hurt, like betrayal doesn't sting, but we can just call it what it is. In fact, Peter uses language to help us understand this isn't a pleasant experience. He says, the fiery ordeal which has come on you. It's designed to create an image in our mind of unpleasant circumstances. Right? And so when we suffer, when we may be persecuted for our faith, when you might be insulted or ridiculed or rejected or ostracized or isolated, in those moments, the biblical expectation is not that you somehow detach from all your emotions and say, this doesn't bother me, I don't care. But it's that we can fully embrace and acknowledge everything we feel, think, and question in that moment, while at the same time being sure that God is with us and God will lead us through it. So suffering is terrible. The other thing Peter wants us to know from the very beginning is that we are not the first to suffer. He says, do not be surprised at this ordeal that's come on you as if something strange has happened to you. Now, logically and rationally, we all understand the fact that bad things will happen to us at one time or another. Right? We're going to experience difficulty, and Peter's helping his original audience understand, don't be surprised that you're being persecuted by the Roman Empire for your faith. You have rejected the way of life they have established, chosen another path, and so you shouldn't be shocked that there is a negative response to that. Now, I know that, you know that, and yet when something hard or difficult happens to me, what's our first question? Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this, and how quickly can I get out of it? And if we get stuck there, we kind of fail to move forward. We fail to gain the full experience of God's ability to use these circumstances for our good and His glory, and we're just constantly saying, I don't understand why this happened. What Peter's trying to help us understand is because it happens to everybody. When you live in a sin-filled world with sinful people, and you choose a different way of life, not everyone is going to love you and celebrate you for that choice. Right? And then moving past persecution into hardship and suffering, because we live in a world affected by sin, even as followers of Jesus who are fully secure in our identity in Him, there will still be times when we suffer, when we endure hardship, when we go through unwanted circumstances. And this is one of the beauties of our home groups. Pastor Chris mentioned earlier, you have a chance to sign up for home groups this afternoon. Home groups are a space for us to be able to tell our stories and to hear others say, yeah, me too. I've been there, I've done that, I am there, and we're learning, we're growing from each other. My wife and I, with another couple, we lead a group for newly engaged and young married couples. And we feel like God has put that specific group on our heart, those young couples, because we want them to know, hey, it's great, but also there's some difficulty, there's some hard times coming. But we want them to learn early in their marriage, when hard times come, lean into Jesus and lean into each other. And as you will do that, there's a depth and strength of your relationship with Him that fuels your relationship with each other. Now, it's not all doom and gloom in our home group. You know, we're not all like, oh, that's cute. You guys have been married 2 months and never fought. Well, we've been married 20 years. Let's tell you what it's really like. No, it's not that. But it's just, and that's not what Peter's doing for us either. He's not coming to you and saying, oh, your life's good, it's awesome. Just wait, sucker. He's just saying, look, it happens. Bad stuff happens. Difficulty happens. People persecute Christians. You will suffer. You will endure hardship. And when it happens, don't be surprised. But it still catches us off guard because we have discovered the goodness, the grace of Jesus. And we think, well, if they just knew what I knew, if they could just experience what I experienced, they would find the same joy and peace. And we believe that, and yet it's continually rejected in all these different places where we invest our time and effort. Peter's reminding us that as Christians, we will never be perfectly comfortable or welcome in any camp except the camp of Jesus Christ. Right, so there are going to be some spaces where you have 90% of your thoughts and ideas in common, but it's that last 10% of your commitment to Jesus that keeps you from being fully comfortable. Let's put it in language we understand. There will be circles where you are too liberal for everyone else. And there will be circles where you are too conservative for everyone else. There will be times that you are called too loving, and there will be times that you are called too judgmental. There will be times that you are called reckless in your generosity, and other times that you may be called stingy in your discipline. Right? There will be times that you're told you should just forgive faster, and other times where you're told you should seek justice more. But as long as our primary commitment is to Jesus, we will never be completely comfortable or welcome in any camp except for His. And that's hard for some of us as Americans and just the way we're wired, because we think, well, if I'm right, then everyone else should agree. And there's nothing we think we're more right about than our relationship with Jesus Christ. But what Peter is helping us understand is, yes, you are. But in a world steeped in sin, there will always be those who reject, and some of them will reject quietly, but some of them may reject violently. And so in that reality, what do? Suffering is a reality for followers of Jesus. Persecution is a potential reality for everyone who follows Him. What do? Well, Peter wants to remind us of the purpose of that suffering. He tells us, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you. Right? And so even that phrase of a fiery ordeal is meant to kind of conjure up this picture in our mind of precious, like gold, being refined through the fire. It goes through the fire, all the impurities are melted away, and only what is pure and true remains. Now, what Peter is telling us here is not that God is sending every hardship, difficulty, suffering, or persecution to you. But He is telling us God can use any form of suffering, difficulty, hardship, or persecution that may come your way. And the really good news is it comes and God uses it to test us, but we don't have to fail that test. Right? You might have had teachers when you were in school who it seemed like the whole goal of their testing structure was to prove that they were smarter than you. Right? And I don't know how you felt in that class. I always felt like, I know you are. That's why I'm here. I know I don't know what you know, but you don't need to trick me on the test. But then you had some of those other teachers, right, who typically they were coaches, and they would tell you like, hey, you're all getting A's. I'm going to make this as easy as possible for you. Everything that's on the test is stuff I've told you about. I'm going to give you a study guide that has 10 questions. 8 of those are going to be on your test. If you have a question in the middle of your test, you can use your book. You can ask me. You can call your mom. You can ask a friend. We're going to get good grades in this class, right? Now, when Peter says these ordeals come on us to test us, God is not the teacher kind of at a distance saying, I know you're going to mess up and I can't wait to watch you fail. But He's the one saying, not only have I given you the answer, not only is Jesus the answer, but He will be with you. And if you try to step off path, if you try to write the wrong answer, color the wrong bubble, He's there letting you know, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. It's not a test we're intended to take through our own power, our own strength. But every test that we endure is one that we can pass because of the power of Christ at work in us. So don't be surprised. Persecution, suffering, hardship, difficulty, unwanted circumstances. It doesn't mean that God has sent them to you. Though later we will see, Peter says there are times He does. But regardless of how the hardship has come, our job as followers of Jesus, before we cry out, God, get me out of this, is to say, Lord, what do you want to teach me in it? There are lessons to be learned, which means we have to ask, whatever we're facing today, we have to ask, am I passing this test? What is Jesus trying to teach me? What is He trying to refine out of me? What is He trying to expose in me? And am I passing this test? Now I know just individually there are just dozens and dozens of different hardships and difficulties and forms of suffering and maybe even experiences of persecution that you're experiencing today. And I don't know the details of your situation. I don't have the ability to say, here, this is what I think God is teaching you. But I do think just we can use something a little broader as an example to help us understand how does God use difficult circumstances to test us and to refine us, right? And really trying to become aware of that. There's a man named C.E.B. Cranfield. He says, those whose Christianity is not real vanish from the ranks at the approach of danger. So what he's telling us is basically there are circumstances that come in life that reveal, are you committed to Jesus because of who he is and what he's done, or are you committed to Jesus because you want his blessings and his stuff? And it's challenging for me, and I think for us to put it in our context, maybe we replace the word danger with some other things. Right? I mean, just think if you substitute those whose Christianity is not real, vanish from the ranks at the approach of difficulty, at the approach of frustration, at the approach of the unknown, at the approach of the uncomfortable, if we just want to go ahead and mess and aggravate everyone, at the approach of a pandemic, at the approach of a quarantine, at the approach of a shutdown, at the approach of a presidential election, at the approach of a mask ordinance. When life makes it harder for me to follow Jesus, do I keep following him or do I run away from him? Right, it's a season of difficulty where I think in the American church we can see that many have fallen from the ranks at the approach of danger. George Barna does a lot of research regarding the role of church in the life of American Christians. He came out with a study about a month ago that showed that since the shutdown in March across the nation, 30% of American Christians have stopped attending church completely. Not that they've stopped attending in person. They've stopped watching online. They've stopped all forms of engagement with the local church. A third of our brothers and sisters, at the first approach of discomfort, of hardship, of difficulty, have abandoned the ranks. Now, I know there are some, even watching online this morning, that because of health issues, because we're not talking to you, okay? But for many of us, we have to be honest. I mean, for me, I kind of went through this in two different ways. Right, so we do the shutdown in March and we go online at Christian Chapel and you know what I discovered? I discovered Sunday mornings when I have pre-recorded a sermon and don't come to church on a Sunday are a lot easier and more relaxed than when I do. So for about 8 weeks on Sunday mornings, I wasn't getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was getting up at 8 or 8:30 in the morning, right? And my family went to church while I made eggs in the kitchen, while Angie did something else, while our kids were on the couch, and it was very comfortable, and it was very convenient, and there would have been an opportunity for us as a family to say, like, let's not rush back. Let's enjoy this. All right, so what is being tested there? Well, in me, what's being tested is, do I love my comfort and my convenience more than my commitment and my place in the body of Christ? When the doors reopen, now I'm in a different spot, I get it, than you, because as the pastor, you can't really say like, hey, you know what, I'll come when I feel like it. That doesn't always work, right? Because I would only come on days when everything went perfectly for me. So you'd see me about 10 Sundays a year. And other than that, it'd be like, whoever, I don't know. Right, so I don't get that option, but you do. You have the option of, hey, if it's not comfortable, if it's not convenient, if it's not easy, just stay home, we can watch it online, right? So maybe one of the tests that we're asking now is, if church is still the only thing I'm quarantining from, am I maybe doing it wrong? Right? And now everybody in here is like, yeah, get those people. Tell them, right? But that's not it. And if you're online, it's not that. But it's just these periods of evaluation. So for Angie and I, it was that moment of like, okay, we can go back to church. We figured out how to safely do that. Let's do it. Let's go. And then we come back, and it's not exactly what we want it to look like. It's not exactly what I want it to feel like. I mean, it's pretty terrible standing up here and looking at all this mask stuff going on, right? Like it's not pleasant, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable. And so when that Tulsa mask ordinance comes through, then for me, there's this second test. Right? Because I don't know, none of you are like me, but I have a thick and wide, stubborn streak that says nobody's going to tell me what to do. And my mom will be here in second service to watch my little girl get baptized, and she can tell you the stories of the thousands of spankings she gave me to try to shrink that streak just a little bit. Angie can tell you, hers is as wide as mine. So we can both tell you stories of what interesting conversations that creates in marriage at times when you're both that way. So anytime that comes out, my initial response is, well, nobody's going to tell me what to do. Tell me to wear a mask to come to church. I'll show you. I'll stay home. Which, for me, again, you do you. You let God speak to you. The thing God spoke to me was like, Chris, that's basically the equivalent of when you were a little kid playing basketball and you got mad at your friends and you took your ball and went home. It's like, fine, you guys aren't going to do it exactly how I want. I'm out of here. So what are we doing? We're saying here, like, hey, if a paper-thin mask can keep me from worshiping or serving, maybe I've abandoned the ranks a little faster than I would like. Maybe it's a sign God's speaking to me of, hey, there's a test, there's a refining. My selfishness, my pride is being exposed here. Now again, I know there's medical issues, there's conditions. I'm not even getting into that. There's space for you. But anytime we face difficult circumstances, our default reaction is, what can I do to control this and how can I get out of it? And what Peter is challenging us with is, hey, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that's come on you to test you. Whether God sent it or is simply using it isn't actually the point right now. The point is he's using it to refine you. And so what is being exposed? And when it's exposed, are you allowing it to be burned away? Or are you saying, no, this is right and true, and I'm going to take my ball and go home? And it's not just when it comes to COVID and pandemics and mask ordinances, but you can apply that in every single season of life that you're in. The purpose of suffering, God's use for it, of persecution, is to refine us. It doesn't mean that if we're sick, we're not praying for healing. It doesn't mean if we're in need, we're not praying for provision. It doesn't mean that we're seeking it out, but it means when it comes, we're asking God, what do you want to do in me here? What lessons do you want me to learn? And then we'll quickly work through these last things. Peter talks to us about our reaction to suffering. So if we shouldn't be surprised when it comes, and if God's going to use it to test us and refine us, then how do we make sure we stay in a position where we are faithful to Him, hearing and obeying all that He says? And Peter lays out several things that we can do. First, he tells us in verse 13, rejoice in suffering. He says, but rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when His glory is revealed. So what do you rejoice in? You rejoice in two things. You rejoice, first of all, in that inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, you're participating with Him. This is what Paul tells us in Philippians. I want to know Christ and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in His sufferings. That in suffering, we identify with Jesus, right? In baptism this morning, we're symbolizing that of you're dying to your old way of life, but you're also enduring the suffering as you come to new life with Him. But it's not just that, oh, now I understand what Jesus went through. It's also that when we suffer, Jesus identifies with us. He walks with us. There is a nearness of God in suffering that you will never know in any other season of life. It doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean we seek it out. But you know this is true just from your own relationships. The friends who are the closest to you are the ones who are there in your darkest hours. The family members you know you can count on are the ones who held your hand through the grief and the loss. The coworkers that you know always have your back are the ones that were there in the lean years and the difficult moments. So what Peter's trying to help us understand is you can rejoice in suffering. You're not rejoicing in your circumstances, but you're rejoicing in this moment. I will be closer to Jesus, and Jesus will be close to me. But it's not just a present experience. He's also telling us, but you're also looking ahead to when His glory will be revealed. So you're rejoicing Jesus is with me in my suffering, but we're also rejoicing of my suffering is temporary because He will return. He will wipe every tear from every eye. He will right every wrong. He will make all things new. He will erase even the memory of pain and difficulty from my life. So we rejoice that Jesus is with us, and we rejoice that these things are light and momentary compared to the eternal glory we'll share with him. Then Peter tells us in verse 14, you're also blessed in suffering. He says, if you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Again, telling us, hey, look, when others make fun of you, when they mock you, when they ridicule you, you are blessed because it means the Spirit of God that's on you and in you is visible to others. God's Spirit on God's people always creates a response. And so that means it's something that we're going to say, okay, if they treated Jesus this way, what's he tell us? Don't be surprised if the world hates you. It hated me first. So if you identify with him, there will be times and spaces where you're rejected or insulted because of it. And Peter says, in that moment, remember, you're blessed. Because this is proof of your identity with Christ, of his Spirit that dwells in you. And then he also tells us you should evaluate in your suffering. Verse 15, if you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or a thief or any other kind of criminal or even as a meddler. Again, just a wonderful caveat of, hey, Christians, not every form of suffering is because you follow Jesus. Sometimes Christians suffer because we behave in unchristian ways. Every time somebody rejects me, it's not necessarily because I'm a Christian. Sometimes it's just because I'm a jerk. Sometimes it's because I'm selfish. Sometimes it's because I'm arrogant, because I'm difficult to love, because I'm indifferent. Right? Sometimes the reason you struggle making friends is not necessarily because you follow Jesus. It's because you have a terrible temper or you love to gossip. So people don't want to get close to you. So what's Peter telling us? He's saying, look, when you suffer, evaluate. One of the ways that God tests us and refines us in periods of suffering, in seasons of persecution, of hardship, of difficulty, is by speaking to us about, hey, through that refining fire, here's some things that are being exposed. Now, sometimes we have thrown ourselves into the fire, but God's still going to use it and expose it. So what do? I want to encourage you 3 ways that you can evaluate when you're suffering. The first is you can pray. When life is hard, the first response is always prayer. And again, it's fine, it's good, it's biblical and scriptural to pray, God, take this away, I don't want to deal with it anymore. But there should also be a prayer of, Lord, what do you want to teach me here? What do you want to say to me here? As I prayed those prayers in March and April, God was showing me, hey, there's a streak of your heart that seeks comfort and convenience above all else. As I prayed him again, the end of July, he was saying, hey, there is a stubborn, anti-authoritarian streak in you, and we need to deal with that. All right, so you're going to pray, and God's going to speak. Now, in addition to praying, you're also going to read the Scriptures. And you're going to say, okay, in the Scriptures, have other people suffered as I am suffering now? Have other people endured hardship as I'm enduring it now? And if so, what did God say to them? If so, what was their experience and how does that speak to my situation? And if there aren't specific examples, are there overarching principles that can help me understand God's purpose and God's plan and some of the things he might be wanting to do in me in these moments? So we're going to pray, we're going to read the Scriptures, and then the last thing, we're going to live in community. And we're going to ask other people. I mean, if you want to know in a season of hardship, am I passing this test? Yes, pray about it. Yes, read the Scriptures. But also ask other mature Christians and then give them the permission to speak truthfully to you. Right? You don't want Tulsa nice responses. You don't want people like, hey, do you see anything in me? No, man, you're good. Which is code for yes, but I don't want to get into it right now. But give them permission. Tell me honestly. What are you seeing in me? What are you hearing in my language? What are you sensing in my emotions? What are you reading in my posts? What do you see in all of these things? And as we evaluate, God speaks. He begins to expose, and the good news again, these are tests he intends for us to pass. So he begins to show us these are the spaces we're going to work, these are the questions I'm asking, and these are the answers that I'm going to enable you to live out. So when hardship comes, we evaluate. And Peter tells us we also identify in suffering. He says in verse 16, however, if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. So again, it's a similar idea to what he's laid out for us to you're blessed when they insult you because the Spirit of God lives on you. This is one of the few places in the New Testament where the term Christian is used. And the way Peter uses it gives us or kind of implies that the common use of the word Christian was a term of derision directed towards the church. They didn't know what to call them. It was this new movement that had started. And so the name that stuck was Christian. Why? Because they were most closely identified with Christ. So he's telling them, if you suffer because you're a Christian, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to hide. It's not something to change. It's not something to try to work around, but it's something to be embraced because you are worthy of bearing that name. Reminding us again of this divine inheritance we've been given. You're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, those who've been called out of darkness and into his marvelous light to declare the praises of God. Peter tells them if the difference in their life leads to the rejection of others, they should rejoice that they are having the same experience that Jesus had. And then he tells us in verse 17 to persevere in suffering. This is one of those passages that maybe you've heard preached at different times. I don't know your church background, where you grew up, but it is as a pastor, as a preacher, it's an easy one to preach hard. For it is time for judgment to begin with God's household. And sometimes the messages I've heard, that's all the farther they get in that. And then proceed to tell me all the things that God is ready to judge me for and why I have welcomed it on myself. But that's not actually what Peter is doing here. He's not threatening us. He's not saying you better straighten up or else. He's not saying I've heard about your misdeeds and I'm coming to confront. But instead, it's actually a statement of comfort. He says it is time for judgment to begin with God's household. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? Peter's not saying that every experience of persecution, suffering, hardship, or difficulty are the direct punishment of sin sent from God to us. But he is saying we will be judged according to how we respond in this season of persecution, hardship, suffering, or difficulty. So it's not a threat. Again, he's promised us all through his letter, Jesus is with you. He's chosen you to follow him at this time, in this place, among these people, under these circumstances. You are a chosen child of God. You're one of the elect, and he's not going to undo his choosing because life gets a little hard for you right now. But Peter also wants to remind us, and there is an element of warning here, of, hey, when life gets hard, the answer is never to abandon Jesus. He says judgment has come, and we are experiencing it in the church, but we experience it as people of hope with confidence that the tests that come, Jesus enables us to pass. And then Peter reminds us, but what of those who don't follow him? What's to become of the unrighteous and the sinner? And so there's two things that we need to remember here. We persevere in suffering to welcome others into the kingdom of God with us. To remind them, to remind us that there's an evangelistic motivation being laid out here. If judgment is coming, and for the people of God, we can endure it with joy because we know we stand in the righteousness of Christ. But for the unrighteous, for the ungodly, for the sinner, what hope is there? And Peter's answer is none unless you give it to them. So persevere in suffering, not just for your sake, but also for the sake of your witness in the world and the sake of bringing others in. When Christians suffer with hope, it sends a signal to the world of the true transforming power of Jesus Christ. And then he's also just reminding us of, hey, when life gets hard, there is going to be a temptation to abandon the ranks. Say, hey, it's not comfortable, it's not convenient, it's not the way I wanted it. I'm going to take my ball and go home. And Peter's just reminding us of, hey, just don't forget, God's your judge. Don't forget, he's holding us accountable for how we behave. And so we really have a choice of we can trust in Jesus or we can pursue our own path. And then he finishes by telling us, when we suffer, just keep doing good. In verse 19, so then those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. So here's the portion. I mean, there are several parts of what Peter said here that I don't particularly enjoy or appreciate because they're hard to hear and hard to apply. But that little line of those who suffer according to God's will is particularly troublesome to me at times. Because it means there may be times and seasons where God sends difficulty my way to expose how little I'm relying on Jesus and how much I'm relying on myself. But the other way of understanding that is there's nothing that happens to a believer ever that is outside of God's control. So no matter the reason you suffer, no matter the source of persecution, no matter where the hardship is coming from, the response of followers of Christ is to commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. There's no time where we say, you know what, I've done enough, I've tried enough, I've worshiped enough, I've served enough, life is too hard, I'm stepping out. But we just keep trusting our Creator and we keep doing good. When you're tested, remain faithful and do good. When you're persecuted, remain faithful and do good. When you suffer, remain faithful and do good. When you're harmed by others, remain faithful and do good. When you lose the job, when you miss the scholarship, when the friends reject you, when the family members mock you, remain faithful and do good. Again, Peter's not writing in the abstract here. He's writing to people who are really experiencing the throes of persecution. Their life, their liberty, their jobs, their families are at risk. And his reminder is not run to the hills and hide till it's over. It's stay faithful and do good. These are lessons that we hope to never apply, but we know we will. At some point in life, we all experience rejection, isolation, loss, betrayal, abandonment. We'll be ridiculed, we'll be insulted, we'll be isolated or ostracized. Many times it will be exclusively because of your commitment to Jesus Christ. There will be policies at work that you simply cannot abide by because you follow Jesus. There will be relationships where you can't satisfy the other person because of your relationship with Jesus. There will be things you're asked to do, places you're asked to go that you just say, I can't do that because I've been called out of darkness and into His marvelous light, and I just can't do those things anymore. And when you make that choice, not everyone is going to pat you on the back and celebrate with you. You may be rejected, you may be ridiculed, you may be mocked, you may be made fun of, you may be persecuted, you might lose the job, the relationships might end. But Peter's response, or his response to us in that situation is, hey, just stay faithful and do good. Jesus is with you. Jesus is working. This situation is not beyond His control, and these temporary difficulties are nothing compared to the eternal glory He has for you. See, in every season of suffering, we always want to lift our eyes up off of the problems around us and onto the glory of God at work in the world and His promise that we are ultimately people of resurrection. So even if death comes for us, it doesn't win. When hardship comes, you really have two choices. It either pushes you closer to Jesus or it pushes you away from Him. And my prayer, no matter where you are in life, is that these lessons of 1 Peter 4 settle deep in your soul and you remember, even in the most difficult, trying, aggravating, frustrating periods of life, stay faithful, do good, because Jesus is with you. Will you stand with me? I want to pray for you, and then the band's going to lead us in a final song this morning. If you'll bow your heads and close your eyes. The first thing that we have to do to endure suffering is we have to surrender our lives to Jesus. And so if you've never done that, in just a moment as we sing, you're going to be able to head out the back doors and to your left into the prayer room. And we have a team of pastors and prayer team members who are waiting to pray that prayer with you, to welcome you in to God's kingdom. If you're watching online or listening later, you can let us know at christianchapel.com/prayer that you want to say yes to Jesus. We'll be in touch with you this week and send you out a bunch of resources to get you going on that journey. I also want to pray some specific prayers. If you're here this morning and you're in a season of suffering, a season of difficulty, hardship, persecution, whatever the situation might be, will you raise your hand where you are so I can pray with you and for you? Jesus, you see each one of us. You know the details of our life. You know the aggravation, the frustration, the anger. You know the hurt and the pain that's coming. And Jesus, we're not saying you sent these things, but we believe that you can work through them. So we do pray for deliverance. We do pray for healing. We do pray for all of your power to be at work in our circumstances. But Lord, we at the same time pray for your voice to scream the lessons you're teaching us in these moments. In our suffering, Lord, will you be near to us so that we can be near to you? Jesus, we want to be pushed towards you, into your arms, into your comfort, into your strength. And so I pray for those who are hurting this morning that they would feel the comfort of your Spirit, that they would receive the confidence that their life is in your hands, that nothing has caught you off guard or taken you by surprise. But you are at work and you are with them in these difficulties. In Jesus' name.